You noticed it first in the small things, the same conversation arriving in a different mouth, the same kind of person walking back into your life wearing a new name, the same argument breaking out at the same dinner table, 20 years after you swore you had left that table behind. You stopped calling it coincidence somewhere between the third and the fourth occurrence. The word coincidence began to feel like a small lie the ego tells itself so the floor underneath can stay flat. Jung had a word for this, though the word has been softened by a century of careless use. He called it synchronicity, and what he meant by it was not the gentle mysticism it has become on bookshelves and meditation apps. He meant something harder. He meant that the psyche and the world are not as separated as the Cartesian habit assumes. He meant that meaningful coincidence is not the universe winking at you. It is the unconscious making itself legible through the only language it has left, which is the language of pattern, repetition, and arrangement. The patterns in your life are not random. They are also not arranged by an external author. This is the first distinction that has to be made cleanly, because the popular reading of synchronicity collapses into one of two errors. The first error is to call everything coincidence and refuse the data. The second error is to call everything destiny and refuse responsibility. Jung walked between these two, and the walk was not comfortable. He insisted that the psyche participates in the arrangement of what arrives, and that this participation is largely unconscious, and that the unconscious does not arrange things to comfort you, it arranges them to be seen. Consider what this means at the level of an ordinary life. The same kind of man keeps appearing. The same kind of friendship keeps unraveling at the same point. The same job in a different building with different titles on the door produces the same exhaustion by the third month. You changed cities. You changed husbands. You changed careers. The pattern did not change. The pattern simply waited for the new container and resumed. The first reflex is to blame the world. The second reflex is to blame yourself. Both reflexes are too simple. The psyche does not punish you with repetition. The psyche repeats because something has not yet been seen, and the unconscious has no other way to insist. It cannot send you a letter. It can only arrange your life until the arrangement becomes loud enough to enter consciousness as a question. The question is rarely the one the ego wants to ask. There is a phrase Jung used in his later work that has been almost entirely stripped of its weight. He said that what we do not bring to consciousness comes to us as fate. The sentence is quoted constantly. It is rarely understood. What he meant was structural. The unconscious content, the unmet complex, the unresolved figure, does not stay inside you waiting politely. It moves outward into the field of your life and begins to organize the people, the timing, the conflicts, and the decisions that surround you. Fate, in this reading, is not external. Fate is the unconscious externalized. The man who could not face his hatred of his father will marry the woman whose father he hates by proxy. The woman who could not face her grief for her mother will become, by her late 40s, a mother to the entire room she walks into. The child who learned that love required performance will, at 50, be exhausted by a marriage in which she has performed competence for 30 years and cannot remember what she actually wanted at 22. None of this is random. None of it is destiny in the romantic sense. It is the unconscious arranging the outer world to mirror the inner unfinished work. The unfinished work has a vocabulary, and the vocabulary is repetition. You can feel this in the body before the mind catches up. There is a particular kind of fatigue that arrives in the middle of a familiar argument, a fatigue that has nothing to do with the current conversation. The body recognizes the shape of the exchange before the conscious mind names it. The shoulders begin a contraction that began 30 years ago in a different kitchen, with a different person, around a different table. The current opponent is not the original opponent. The current opponent is a stand-in, and the body knows it, and the body is tired of the assignment. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the complex. The complex is not a memory. The complex is a magnetic field. It pulls toward itself the figures, the situations, and the dynamics that allow it to repeat. It does not do this because it wishes to hurt you. It does this because, in the unconscious, what is not yet conscious is not yet finished. And what is not finished must be performed again. The performance is the unconscious request for witness. The error of self-help is to treat these patterns as bad habits to be corrected. The Jungian view is colder and more accurate. The pattern is not a habit. The pattern is a structure. It will not yield to affirmations because it was not built by affirmations. It was built by an event or by a series of events that organized the psyche around a particular survival arrangement. And the arrangement is older than your conscious adult life, and the arrangement has been running the room for so long that you mistook it for your personality. What feels like your taste in partners is often the complex selecting for familiarity. What feels like your bad luck with employers is often the same authority figure arriving in a new suit. What feels like a string of accidents, the cars that broke down at the worst moments, the friendships that collapsed at the threshold of intimacy, the careers that stalled 3 months before promotion, is often the unconscious insisting that the threshold itself cannot yet be crossed, because something at the threshold has not been faced. This is not a comforting reading of life. It is, however, a precise one, and precision is what the psyche actually asks for, far more than comfort. The recognition of pattern does not require belief in anything supernatural. It requires only that you stop treating your own life as a series of disconnected episodes. The episodes are connected. They are connected by the underground river of an unconscious that is older than your biography, and that has been speaking in the only language available to it for as long as you have been alive. The language is arrangement. The grammar is repetition. The text is your life as you have lived it. The day you begin to read the text differently is the day the pattern begins to lose its automatic authority, not because you have defeated it. The unconscious is not defeated. It is recognized, and recognition, in Jung's vocabulary, is the only true threshold between fate and freedom. What is unrecognized continues to arrange. What is recognized can finally be metabolized. The kitchen is the same kitchen, the argument has the same shape, but the woman sitting at the table has, for the first time, noticed that the table itself was inherited, that the chairs were assigned long before she chose them, and that the conversation she is about to have was written by people who are no longer in the room. The cup was still on the counter where she had left it, the coffee inside it gone cold, and she had not yet noticed that she was standing in the same posture her mother used to stand in at the same hour of the morning. The recognition arrived without drama. It arrived the way most real recognitions arrive, not as revelation but as a small, almost embarrassing noticing of a detail that had been present for decades. Her hand was on her hip in the exact angle. Her weight was on the left leg in the exact way. The kettle had clicked off and she had not poured. She was waiting for someone to come into the kitchen so the morning could begin, except no one was coming. And the morning had begun an hour ago, and the person she was waiting for had been dead for 11 years. This is the level at which the unconscious does its arranging, not in cosmic gestures, in postures, in the angle of a hand on a hip, in the moment of pause before pouring coffee, in the small inherited choreography that the body performs faithfully long after the original choreographer has left the building. The psyche is not loud. The psyche is patient. It waits until the choreography is so habitual that you no longer recognize it as choreography, and then it repeats the choreography in front of you until something inside finally turns its head. Jung described the unconscious as autonomous, and the word autonomous is worth holding for a moment. He did not mean that the unconscious is a separate person inside you. He meant that it operates by laws you did not write and does not require your permission to act. It selects what enters your dream life. It selects what you remember and what you forget. It selects, very often, who you fall in love with, and what you mistake for chemistry is frequently the complex recognizing its preferred partner across a crowded room. The conscious ego is not the author of these selections. The conscious ego is the press secretary, announcing decisions that were made in a meeting it was not invited to attend. The complex is the meeting. The complex is the room where the actual decisions happen. And the complex is not a single thing, it is a constellation, in the literal Jungian sense, a grouping of charged contents around a central nucleus, and the nucleus is almost always an early relational arrangement that the psyche has not yet been able to release. The mother complex is not your relationship with your mother. The mother complex is the structure that organized inside you in response to the original maternal field. And that structure now operates as an internal template through which all later maternal experiences, all later nurturance experiences, all later experiences of being held or not held, are filtered. You do not see the mother in front of you. You see the mother through the template. The template was built before you had language for it, and the template is older than your capacity to question it. This is why the pattern feels like reality. It is not that you keep choosing the wrong people. It is that the template keeps recognizing its own kind, and the recognition feels from the inside exactly like attraction, exactly like familiarity, exactly like the moment when you say to yourself, "This one feels like home." The word home in this usage is suspect. The home the template recognizes is the home that built the template. If the original home was a place where love required vigilance, the template will recognize, decades later, the partner who requires vigilance, and the body will produce the sensation of homecoming, and you will mistake the sensation for evidence of right choice. The psyche is more honest than the ego about what it has learned. The ego learned a story. The story is that you want peace, that you want kindness, that you want a steady love. The psyche learned a pattern. The pattern is that love is something you earn through alertness, that kindness arrives as a reward for correctness, and that a steady love is suspicious because nothing in the original field was steady. The ego makes lists of what it wants. The psyche makes choices based on what it knows. The choices win. They win every time until the pattern is brought into consciousness with enough precision that the choice can finally be unmade. A woman once described a dream that recurred for years in different settings. She was always entering a house. She did not remember leaving. The house was always familiar in detail, but unfamiliar in geography. She would walk through the rooms with a growing sense that she had lived here, and a growing inability to remember the terms under which she had left. In one version, the kitchen was warm, but the back door was open onto darkness. In another version, the upstairs rooms were exactly as she remembered them from childhood, except that the furniture was rearranged in ways that suggested someone else had been living there in her absence. She always woke before she could find out who. The dream was not about a house. The dream was about the psyche's own architecture, and the rearranged furniture was the unconscious continuing to live the life that her conscious ego had moved out of years before. The pattern was upstairs, doing its work, regardless of whether she returned to inspect it. She had built an adult life that, on the surface, bore no resemblance to her childhood home. The dream was telling her that the resemblance was not on the surface. The resemblance was in the floor plan. What the unconscious arranges, it arranges from blueprints that were drawn before you were old enough to draft your own. This is why willpower fails against pattern. Willpower belongs to the ego, and the ego is working with the surface layer. The pattern is operating from the basement. You cannot will the basement to be a different basement. You can only descend slowly and with sufficient candle and begin to learn the shape of the rooms that have been making the upper house behave as it does. The descent is not romantic, it is methodical and frequently dull. It does not involve dramatic revelation. It involves noticing that you tightened your jaw at the sound of a particular tone of voice and asking, without rushing to conclusion, where that tightening was first taught. It involves catching yourself apologizing before any offense has been registered by the room and asking who, originally, required that apology in order for the room to remain safe. It involves recognizing that you have planned this entire week around the avoidance of one phone call, and asking what exactly you are still afraid the phone call will confirm. The patterns are not random because the patterns are the unconscious doing what the unconscious does. It moves what cannot yet be seen into a position where it must be seen. The relationship breaks at the same point because the same point has not yet been faced. The career stalls at the same threshold because the threshold itself is the wound. The friendship dissolves at the same moment of expected intimacy because intimacy, in the original blueprint, was the moment at which the love became conditional, and the body is still defending against the condition by ending the relationship before the moment can arrive. None of this is failure. All of it is structure. The structure is loyal to its origin, and the loyalty is not conscious. And the loyalty will continue to organize your life until the loyalty is named. There is a particular grief that accompanies the first real seeing of one's own pattern. It is not the grief of having made bad choices. It is the colder grief of recognizing that what felt like choice was, for long stretches, something closer to automation. The years in which you believed you were selecting your partner, your job, your friendships, your private convictions, were also years in which a constellation older than your conscious self was selecting through you. The grief is the grief of belated authorship. You did not write the early script. You inherited it. And until you can read it, you cannot revise it. Jung was clear that the goal is not to eliminate the unconscious. The goal is not even to fully understand it. The unconscious is larger than consciousness will ever be, and any psychology that promises mastery of the unconscious has already misunderstood the territory. The goal is something quieter. The goal is to enter into relationship with the unconscious, to allow it to speak through dreams and through patterns and through the small daily evidence of its operation, and to listen over years with a kind of attention that does not flinch from what is heard. The pattern is not your enemy. The pattern is your unfinished sentence. It will keep speaking the sentence in different mouths and different rooms and different decades until the sentence is heard. And the hearing is what allows the sentence, finally, to end. She poured the coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. Standing in the kitchen, in the posture of a woman she had loved and resented and was now, for the first time, simply seeing. She had spent most of her adult life believing that the work was to escape the pattern. The believing had been earnest. She had read the books, attended the retreats, sat across from 3 different therapists in 3 different decades, and emerged each time with the same private conviction that this time, finally, she had broken something, and each time, within 18 months, the pattern had reassembled itself in a slightly different room, with slightly different people, and with the same internal weather. By the 4th iteration, she had stopped announcing the breakthroughs. By the 5th, she had begun to suspect that the entire framework of escape was itself part of the pattern. This is the level of recognition that does not arrive in the first phase of inner work. It arrives later, and it is harder to metabolize than the initial recognitions, because the initial recognitions still permit the fantasy of an exit. The later recognition closes the exit. There is no door out of the pattern through which one walks cleanly into a pattern-free life. There is only the slow work of seeing the pattern operate in real time, and of remaining present to it without performing the next iteration on cue. The freedom is not the freedom of escape. It is the freedom of refusal at the level of structure, and the refusal is far less dramatic than the seeker imagined it would be. The shadow of all pattern recognition is the wish to be above the pattern. The wish itself is the pattern continuing. The ego, once it has learned the language of depth psychology, begins to use the language for its old purposes, which are mastery, control, and the avoidance of further humiliation. The new vocabulary becomes a sophisticated camouflage for the same arrangement. The complex, when threatened by genuine consciousness, will frequently retreat behind the very tools designed to reveal it. This is the most quietly defeating discovery of the inner work, and it is the one that almost no introduction to Jung will mention. Because it does not sell, you begin to notice it in small reflexes. You catch yourself analyzing a friend's behavior through Jungian categories within minutes of the friend disappointing you. The analysis is technically accurate. It is also, on closer inspection, doing exactly what the original wound trained you to do, which is to convert relational pain into an act of intellectual sovereignty. The complex did not vanish. The complex learned a new dialect. It now sounds educated. It now cites sources. The room it controls is the same room. This is what Jung meant by the appropriation of unconscious content by the ego, and it is one of the gravest dangers of all serious inner work. The ego does not naturally yield. The ego adapts. When the unconscious begins to surface material that threatens the old arrangement, the ego will, with remarkable creativity, find a way to incorporate the new material into the old structure without allowing the structure to actually shift. The result is a person who can speak fluently about their shadow while continuing, in every consequential relationship, to project it outward with surgical precision. The fluency is the new disguise. The unconscious notices this. The unconscious notices everything. And when it notices that its messages are being intercepted at the level of vocabulary rather than received at the level of structure, it does what it has always done. It escalates. The patterns become louder. The repetitions become harder to misread. The synchronicities, which had been operating quietly in the background, begin to acquire a kind of dark insistence. The same name keeps appearing in unrelated conversations. The same number keeps showing up at significant moments. The body begins to produce symptoms that do not fit any medical category cleanly. The unconscious is not playing. The unconscious is finishing the sentence. There is a hidden resentment that builds inside a person who has done years of inner work and has not yet been willing to face this layer. The resentment is at the work itself. The resentment is at Jung, at the therapists, at the books that promised something they could not deliver. The resentment is, beneath all that, at the psyche for not yielding, for not granting the relief the ego was certain it had earned by all the effort. This resentment is psychologically legitimate. It is also, in the Jungian sense, the next thing that must be brought to consciousness, because the resentment is itself the complex defending its territory under the guise of disillusionment, with the methods that came too close. The complex is not stupid. The complex has been protecting an arrangement that, in its original moment, was necessary for survival. It does not surrender survival logic because an adult woman has read a book and would like to be free now. It surrenders, when it surrenders at all, through something far harder than insight. It surrenders through a particular quality of repeated witness in which the ego stops trying to fix what it has seen and begins, slowly, to let itself be changed by what it has seen. The change is not chosen, the change is permitted, and the permitting is the actual work, and the actual work is mostly invisible, and the actual work cannot be performed for an audience, even an internal one. A man once returned to analysis after a gap of 7 years, having decided in the interval that he had completed his inner work. He arrived to report that the marriage he had built during those 7 years with a woman he had described as unlike any of his previous partners had begun to fail in a way that was structurally identical to the failure of his first marriage. He sat down and said, with a flat voice that was the most honest thing he had said in a decade, that he no longer believed in his own progress. The analyst did not correct him. The analyst recognized that the flat voice was the first sound of something real beginning to enter the room. The previous 7 years had been the complex doing maintenance work on its old position. Under the cover of growth, this is the layer at which most inner work stops, because this layer is humiliating, and the ego will choose almost any other interpretation rather than sit inside the humiliation. The humiliation is the recognition that the part of you that has been narrating the journey, that has been congratulating itself on the progress, that has been quietly comparing your depth to the shallowness of those around you, is itself the most stubborn operative of the unchanged arrangement. The narrator is not the witness. The narrator is the survivor of the original situation, still performing competence in order to remain safe. What Jung described as the descent into the shadow is not the descent into the obvious vices. The obvious vices are the easy shadow, the one that can be confessed in a workshop and absorbed into a redemption arc. The harder shadow is the structural one. It is the shadow of one's own goodness, one's own depth, one's own apparent integration. It is the shadow that wears the face of the healed person, and it is the shadow that the unconscious arranges patterns to reveal long after the obvious shadow has been catalogued and managed. The patterns that persist past the first round of inner work are not failures of the work. They are the work finally reaching the layer that matters. The early patterns were the visible ones, the relationships that obviously repeated the parental dynamic, the careers that obviously enacted the survival role. The later patterns are subtler and more painful, because they involve the realization that the very identity built to escape the early patterns has become the new vehicle through which the pattern continues. The healer projects the unhealed onto everyone else in the room. The seeker uses seeking as a sophisticated avoidance of arrival. The student of Jung uses Jung as protection against the actual experience of his own unconscious. There is no clean exit from this layer through more reading, more analysis, or more refinement of vocabulary. The exit, if the word even applies, is through a particular kind of stillness in which the ego stops trying to position itself in relation to what is being seen. The ego does not need to be defeated. The ego needs to be relieved of its assignment as the manager of the unconscious. It was never qualified for the assignment, and it has been exhausting itself trying to perform a role for which it was never built. The relief is not pleasant in its early hours. The ego experiences the relief as a loss of authority, and the loss of authority is initially indistinguishable from the loss of self. The body knows the difference. The body knows that something other than ego is finally being allowed to organize the inner room. And the body responds, often before the mind catches up, with a settling that feels almost like grief. The grief is the grief of the long-running performance ending. The performance was sincere. The performance was also a defense, and the defense has been costly, and the body has been carrying the cost for decades. The dream returns. Now she is in the house again, but she does not need to find out who has been living there. She knows, she has always known. The furniture was rearranged by the part of her that had been awake the whole time. In the rooms she refused to enter, doing the work, the upstairs version of her had been too occupied to notice. The two of them, she understands now, are the same woman. They have been the same woman the entire time. The pattern was not the enemy, the pattern was the letter, and she had spent 40 years writing back to the wrong address. By autumn, she had stopped trying to interpret every coincidence. Something had shifted, not in the patterns themselves, which continued to arrive with their usual punctuality, but in the relationship between her and them. She no longer flinched at the recognition. She no longer rushed to extract meaning. The same kind of phone call still came from the same kind of voice, and she still felt the old contraction behind the sternum, and she still recognized the choreography. The recognition no longer demanded that she perform anything. The recognition simply stayed in the room with her, neither defeated nor in command, and the room was, for the first time in a long time, large enough to hold both. This is what integration actually feels like in the body, and it is almost entirely unlike what the books describe. There is no triumphant moment. There is no scene in which the woman stands in the kitchen and declares herself free. The freedom, if it can be called that, arrives as the absence of a particular kind of urgency. The urgency to fix the pattern, the urgency to escape the pattern, the urgency to explain the pattern to someone who has not asked. All three urgencies belong to the same governance. And the governance has begun quietly to dissolve. What replaces it is not enlightenment. What replaces it is a kind of ordinary attention that the ego used to find boring, and that now feels like the only honest available stance. The unconscious continues to arrange. This does not stop. Jung was emphatic on this point and is consistently misread on it. The work is not to silence the unconscious or to render it transparent. The unconscious will go on selecting the people who walk into your life, the dreams that visit at 3 in the morning, the small synchronicities that the rational mind would prefer to dismiss. The change is not in the activity of the unconscious. The change is in what the conscious self does with the arrangements once it sees them. The seeing is the integration. The seeing, sustained over years, becomes the slow alteration of fate into something closer to participation. There is a Jungian distinction here that has been almost entirely lost in popular use, and it is the distinction between fate and destiny. Fate is what the unconscious arranges when consciousness is absent. Destiny is what becomes possible when consciousness enters into relationship with the unconscious arrangement. They are not the same word. They are not even close. Fate is automatic. Destiny requires presence. The woman who lives her whole life inside the inherited pattern is living her fate. The woman who recognizes the pattern, sits with it, and slowly stops feeding it the responses it was designed to extract, has begun, quietly, to live her destiny. The destiny does not look dramatic from the outside. The destiny is the same kitchen, the same coffee, the same hour of the morning. The difference is interior, and the difference is total. This is what Jung pointed toward when he wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is the becoming of what one actually is. The phrase has been misattributed and softened until it sounds like a self-help slogan. The original meaning was much harder. To become what one actually is requires the dismantling of what one was assigned to be. The assignment came from the original family, from the original culture, from the original constellation of complexes that organized inside before any conscious self had a vote. The dismantling is not a single act. It is a long subtraction, performed under conditions of considerable resistance from the parts of the psyche that still believe the original assignment is the only path to safety. The self, in Jung's specific use of the word, is not the ego. The self is the larger ordering principle of the psyche, and it includes the unconscious as well as consciousness. The self does not want the ego to be happy. The self wants the ego to be true. These are very different goals, and the inner work begins to make sense only when this difference is no longer collapsed. The patterns that have repeated in your life were not arranged by an indifferent universe. They were arranged by the self through the unconscious, in service of a wholeness that the ego cannot conceive of and frequently resists. The self is patient. The self has decades to work with. The self will repeat the pattern in whatever container becomes available until the pattern finally produces the recognition it was always pointing toward. The recognition is not the end. The recognition is the beginning of a different relationship with the same material. The complex does not vanish when it is recognized. It loses its automatic authority. This is a smaller claim than the one usually made, and a more accurate one. The mother complex does not disappear because you have understood it. It becomes legible, and what is legible can be entered into conversation with rather than blindly enacted. The conversation is the integration. The integration is not the absence of the complex. The integration is the complex held in consciousness, no longer pulling the strings from the basement, now sitting at the table where you can see it. There is a man Jung wrote about who returned in his 60s to dreams from his childhood, dreams he had not understood at the time, and found that the dreams had been waiting for him. They had not changed. He had finally arrived at the age at which their meaning could be received. This is what the psyche does. It does not deliver its meaning on the schedule the ego prefers. It delivers its meaning when the structure is finally ready to hold what was always present. The childhood dream of the basement and the underground God was, for Jung, a lifelong companion that revealed itself slowly, decade by decade, as he became capable of standing under its weight. The unconscious had been speaking the entire time. The capacity to listen had taken 60 years to construct. This is the structure of an examined life. It is not the structure of arrival. It is the structure of accompaniment. The unconscious accompanies you. The patterns accompany you. The complexes, even partially integrated, accompany you. The work is not to eliminate the company. The work is to develop the kind of relationship in which the company stops dictating and begins slowly to inform. The informed life is not the controlled life. It is the life in which the inner and outer arrangements have begun to mirror each other consciously, instead of mirroring each other unconsciously and calling the mirror an accident. What is required to live this way is a particular quality that the culture does not currently teach and rarely rewards. It is the quality of sustained attention to one's own inner movement without rushing to convert the attention into action, identity, or content for others. This attention is unglamorous. It produces no visible achievement. It does not photograph well. It is, however, the only ground on which the unconscious can begin to trust that its messages will be received rather than performed. And when the unconscious begins to trust this, the quality of what it sends changes. The patterns become more specific, the dreams more articulate, the synchronicities more refined. The psyche is responsive. It will speak with greater precision to a listener who has demonstrated over years the capacity to listen without immediately broadcasting. There is a final piece, and it is the piece most often skipped. The recognition of pattern does not exempt you from being inside the pattern. You will continue to enact some version of what you have come to understand. The understanding does not produce immunity. It produces something more useful, which is the capacity to enact with awareness, to catch yourself mid-gesture, to notice the contraction before it has fully organized your response, and to choose, sometimes, a slightly different next sentence. The choosing is small, the choosing is constant, the choosing accumulated over years is what alters the trajectory. The kitchen is the same kitchen, the chair is the same chair. The woman who sits down with her coffee is, in most respects, the same woman she has been for 40 years, but she sits differently now. because she has begun to know what she is doing when she sits down, and what she is doing has stopped being automatic. The morning belongs to her in a way it never did when she was performing the inherited choreography without seeing it. The performance has not ended. The performance has been brought into the room, and the room is large enough now to contain both the performer and the witness. And the witness is, finally, awake. What had been arranged by fate has been recognized as language. The language has been read. The reader has come home to herself.
This has been Carl Jung Original, a space where the patterns most people live through can finally be named. Voice and imagery, AI-assisted interpretation and framing, original work. Until next lecture.